In 1837, Queen Victoria, who led the British Empire at its peak, ascended the throne. With France weakened and Germany still divided, there was no force that could stop the British Empire. Britain built colonies around the world, so much so that at one time it controlled a quarter of the Earth's land area. That is why the British Empire was called the land where the sun never sets.
The Opium War broke out in 1840. Britain exported opium, a drug, to the Qing dynasty to make up for its trade deficit with the Qing dynasty. However, when the Qing dynasty banned the import of opium, Britain, dissatisfied with this ban, attacked the Qing dynasty. British warships were equipped with steam engines, while the Qing dynasty ships were wind-powered sailing ships.
In addition, British warships were equipped with cannons that could fire explosive shells, while Qing warships were equipped with cannons that fired solid shot. The British Navy, armed with new weapons and warships, easily defeated the Qing army. In this war, the weakness of the Qing dynasty was revealed, and the advance of Western powers into Asia began in earnest. In 1848, Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto, marking the beginning of communism. The publication of the Communist Manifesto in 1848 was a major turning point in the history of communism. Marx's work provided a theoretical framework for the communist movement and inspired revolutions all over the world. The Communist Manifesto is a short pamphlet that outlined Marx's main ideas about communism. Marx argued that capitalism is a system that is inherently exploitative and that it will eventually be overthrown by the working class. He also argued that communism is a system that will replace capitalism and provide a more just and equitable society. In 1861, the conflict over whether to abolish slavery was at its peak in the United States. Eventually, the United States was divided into South and North, leading to a fierce civil war. The Civil War was the deadliest war in American history. The war lasted 5 years and killed more than 1 million people, both civilians and soldiers. The war also caused widespread destruction of property and infrastructure. The war ended with victory for the North, which advocated for the abolition of slavery. But abolitionist President Lincoln was assassinated shortly afterwards. In 1868, Japan carried out the Meiji Restoration. Japan, realizing that it was severely lacking in power compared to the Western powers, modernized itself through the Meiji Restoration and laid the foundation to its rise to become a great power. However, Japan, like the Western powers it was wary of, also took the imperialist path. The first Sino-Japanese War was a conflict between the Qing dynasty of China and Japan, which took place from July 25, 1894 to April 17, 1895. This significant war marked the end of the traditional Chinese dominance in East Asia and established Japan as an emerging power in the region. In 1905, Japan won the Russo-Japanese War and joined the ranks of the great powers. Japan became the first Asian power to defeat a European power in a modern war. The Russo-Japanese War was fought over control of Korea and Manchuria. Japan had been expanding its influence in these regions in the late 19th century, and Russia was also seeking to expand its influence. The war began in February 1904 with a surprise Japanese attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. The war lasted for 18 months and was fought on both land and sea. The Japanese won a number of significant victories, including the Battle of Tsushima, which was one of the largest naval battles in history. The war ended in September 1905 with the signing of the Treaty of Portsmouth. Under the terms of the treaty, Russia ceded southern Sakhalin Island and its interests in Manchuria to Japan. The Russo-Japanese War was a major turning point in Japanese history.
In 1914, World War I broke out. The direct cause of the war was the assassination of the Austrian Crown Prince and his wife in Sarajevo. However, one of the root causes of the war was nationalism. Nationalism emphasized a group's own superiority and encouraged hostility between neighboring countries. As a result, problems that could have been easily resolved through dialogue escalated into war. Initially, the Allied forces led by Germany and Austria had an advantage over Britain and France, but the United States' entry into the war turned the tide. Ultimately, the war ended with Germany's surrender. The damage from the war was so great that the number of soldiers killed was close to 10 million.
The Russian Revolution, led by Lenin in 1917, led to the collapse of the Russian Empire and the creation of the Soviet Republic, the world's first communist state. The Russian Revolution was a complex event with many causes, but one of the most important was the dissatisfaction of the Russian people with the Tsarist regime. The Tsarist regime was an absolute monarchy, and the Tsar had complete control over the government. The Tsarist regime was also very corrupt and inefficient. The Russian Revolution began in February 1917 with a series of strikes and demonstrations by workers and soldiers. The Tsarist regime was unable to suppress the protests, and the Tsar was forced to abdicate.
In October 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power in a coup d'etat. The Bolsheviks were a communist party, and they promised to establish a new socialist government. The Bolsheviks defeated their opponents in the Russian Civil War, and in 1922, they established the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a communist state and one of the two superpowers during the Cold War. The Russian Emperor Nikolai II and his family met a tragic end in a basement on July 17, 1918. On the night of July 17, 1918, the Bolsheviks walked the Romanovs and took them to the basement. The Bolsheviks then opened fire on the Romanovs, killing them all. The execution of the Romanovs was a tragic event that marked the end of the Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for over 300 years. It was also a symbol of the brutality of the Russian Revolution. In 1929, the Great Depression began. The Great Depression in the United States, which began with a crash in the US stock market, spread into a global Great Depression. The countries hit hardest by the Great Depression were Germany and Japan. In Germany, Adolf Hitler took power amid the chaos caused by the Great Depression. Japan also gradually became more extreme in its militarism, including invading Manchuria and China. The Second Sino-Japanese War was a large-scale conflict between the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan that began with Japan's invasion of mainland China on July 7, 1937, and ended on September 9, 1945 with Japan's surrender, which marked the conclusion of both the Sino-Japanese War and World War II. Since the late 19th century, Japan has pursued modernization and bolstered its military capabilities, a process that began with the Meiji Restoration. As a result, Japan developed ambitions to invade China and establish hegemony in East Asia. Conversely, China's national power was eroding from within due to the proliferation of warlords and widespread corruption. In 1931, Japan initiated the Manchurian Incident, leading to the occupation of Manchuria. On July 7, 1937, a clash between Japanese and Chinese troops occurred at Lugo Bridge, a suburb of Beijing, China. This incident served as a catalyst for Japan's large-scale invasion of mainland China. Despite Chinese resistance, the war continued with Japanese superiority. In December 1937, Japanese troops captured Nanjing, China's capital, and carried out large-scale massacres. Despite Chinese resistance, the war continued with Japanese superiority. However, in December 1941, Japan declared war on the United States and Britain, igniting the Pacific War, and subsequently the Sino-Japanese War became a part of World War II. In 1939, World War II, considered the worst tragedy in human history, broke out. At first, it looked like Germany and Italy would win, taking over most of Europe, but the Allied powers, made up of the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain, counterattacked, and Germany lost the war.
More than 70 million people died in this war, and the civilian population suffered particularly great losses. The Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, was particularly notorious. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the US dollar became the reserve currency. This established an international order centered on the United States.
However, the Soviet Union, which opposed this, continued its economic relationship with the United States. This time period was the beginning of the Cold War. The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan in 1945. Soon after, Japan surrendered to the United States, finally ending World War II. Thank you for watching the video. History of Mankind Part 5, provided by History and Current Events. Gina, Bella, Cindy, Helena, and Tony have contributed so far as narrators. Thank you.